A Shed Full of Desks by David Nunes Solomon, published in Stoa number 11. Term after term, in architecture schools around the world, studio spaces are obscured under a crush of design artifacts that are the byproducts of learning. Anyone who has taught or taken a studio where students occupy assigned desks can recall the transformation of an organized, university-administered space into a lived-in environment filled with the detritus of the design process and traces of extracurriculum hours spent eating, socializing, and sleeping. Unlike traditional classrooms, design studios register what is learned, putting on display drawing and model-making techniques, personal libraries, and creative solutions for building a learning environment. Empowered by a 24/7 access, students have a freedom to inhabit and creatively use space rarely encountered in academic or professional settings. At the end of each term, the ad hoc constructions and piles of work produced by a cohort are cleared and the studios are cleaned. They lay dormant until new and returning students reanimate them, elaborating habits passed down from class to class. This continual rebuilding recalls Ronald Barthes' description of the Argonauts who sailed their ship Argo, each piece of which they gradually replaced, so that they ended with an entirely new ship without having to alter either its name or its form. Barthes likened this to language and love, the task of which is to give the one and the same phrase inflections which will be forever new. Architectural school buildings host a cyclical, physical, pedagogical restructuring of the same space at the hands of a collective body of students. The studio spaces remain the same, but it is always created new, as each cohort inflects it with their own creative preoccupations and habits. This spontaneous activity results in heavy use and misuse of the building and is often in tension with canonical works of architecture. As a typology, the architectural school building is tasked with representing the field to young designers, the rest of the academy, and the public. This responsibility is manifested in various ways, as built diagrams to foster transdisciplinary interaction, as tools for reinforcing regional identities, as assertions of stylistic agendas, and as environments that teach through tonic expression. In each case, the architecture school building is an authored work of design, laden with purposeful messaging and intent of use. Yet, due to the nature of studio courses, there are also sites of subtle internal subversion of architectural authorship and permanence. Their iconographic value to the discipline is challenged by a gradual collective design act that overwhelms their original architectures. In Stoa number 8, João Operio and Maria Rebelo opened their essay An Abecedarium for Thinking by asserting that architecture as a discipline implies a specific manner of reading, discussing, and rewriting the world with its own resources. When a student establishes their working environment and working habits at an assigned studio desk, they begin the practice of rewriting the world. While this dynamic is inherent to any studio learning environment, there are architectural school buildings that have been adapted specifically to endure, host, and encourage this frenetic rearrangement and use. They offer lessons in a collective approach to architectural praxis, one through which buildings and students together develop agency through use and misuse. In fact, they require it to actualize their full architectural potential. In the late 1960s, there was a major shift in university education. Born out of anti-war activism, architecture students were integral to deconstructing hierarchies in education. Austrian theologian Ivan Illich's book, Deschooling Society, had a broad impact on education theory by outlining how education sustains social hierarchies and power structures. He proposed a system of self-study where educational webs would transform each moment of living into one of learning, sharing, and caring. By allowing students to study their interests and establish their own courses, Illich hoped to create institutions which serve personal, creative, and autonomous interaction and the emergence of values which cannot be substantially controlled. Paulo Freire, a Brazilian philosopher, argued in his seminal book Pedagogy of the Oppressed that education should be the practice of freedom through a progressive process where staff and students collaborate to learn from each other. Inspired by this thinking, calls for autonomy, freedom, and non-hierarchical exchange as the tools for learning led to structural shifts toward collaborative curriculum development, an emphasis on interdisciplinarity under the umbrella of environmental design. The typological analog to these themes is the open plan building or industrial shed. Today, open plans are common in real estate-driven domestic spaces and corporate offices, but at the time, a space with high floor-to-ceiling clearance, no internal walls, diffuse light, and a robust structure was a thrilling proposition for the location of a school. The type caught on, and many institutions designed or occupied industrial buildings to support their liberatory pedagogical aspirations.